It's a huge market for the genetic engineering industry. Monsanto pushed its way onto the market with genetically modified soy during the mid-90s. Every Japanese person eats soy, and Monsanto wants a piece of the pie. And this even though resistance in Japan to genetically modified food is especially high. The avalanche set off by environmental activist Makiko Irasawa was grist to the mill for the opponents of this technology.
I thought it was so strange. I thought, I'm the consumer. I should be the one to decide whether or not I want to eat genetically engineered foods. But I wasn't able to do that with genetically modified soy.
Ms. Irasawa wanted to know what she was actually eating. She went to the Department of Health, and to her surprise she was allowed to look at the licensing papers for Monsanto's GM soy. This is not allowed elsewhere. The folders are kept in a simple metal cabinet. The unaltered originals mustn't be taken away or photocopied. They have to be copied out by hand. And that's just what Ms. Irasawa did. She and almost 100 helpers copied out nearly 1,000 pages. They noticed that there were serious discrepancies between the Japanese and the American versions. The Japanese one contained no reference, for example, to the weight changes experienced by the lab animals. What do such weight changes tell us? Makiko Irasawa isn't an expert, so she looked for someone who could scientifically evaluate the papers. She went to Masaharu Kawata, assistant professor of microbiology at the University of Nagoya. The same Professor Kawata whose internet texts had come to our attention. Professor Kawata promised us 3 examples to illustrate his criticism of Monsanto's soybeans.
Here we have the papers for the genetically modified soy. And right away we have the first problem. The artificially introduced gene, a protein, was not examined in the plant itself. Monsanto had this protein rebuilt by a bacterium in the laboratory. That is cheaper for Monsanto, but from a scientific point of view, the plant itself has to be examined. Because the protein in the soy and in the bacterium are not necessarily identical. Thus, this method cannot be used to exclude any health risks. And a second point of criticism. Monsanto only investigated a small fraction of the protein. Only the first 15 amino acids of the 455 the protein consists of were examined. The manufacturer cannot exclude allergy risks or even toxicities. I think it is likely Monsanto wanted to hide possible changes and thus possible dangers. This test here is very important. Soy is cooked because only cooked soy is palatable. If this cooking test fails, people's health is at risk. Monsanto conducted the following standard test. Boil once at 100 degrees for 10 minutes. Now the harmful proteins should be destroyed, but they weren't. What did they do then? They just repeated the test, again for 10 minutes at 100 degrees. The protein still wasn't destroyed. Then they boiled the genetically modified soy for a whole 25 minutes, this time at 220 degrees. That's what the papers say. The problem is obvious. No one preparing soy in the home cooks it at 220 degrees, and for half an hour at that. Genetically modified soy should not have been approved. It is probable that the genetic modification made the protein more stable. It just isn't destroyed. For me, this failed cooking test, it says here in the papers how they did it, has a direct connection to the increased number of allergies. Monsanto's conclusion that genetically modified soy is safe is wrong, probably even criminal.
A serious allegation by the professor. What does Monsanto say about this? They continue to deny our request for an interview.
Any scientist that looks into the research or the lack of research on the safety of genetically engineered food comes to the conclusion that these foods should not be on the market. They need another decade or 2 of research.
Monsanto is the company that told us that PCBs were safe. They were convicted of actually poisoning people in their town next to the PCB factory and fined $700 million.